The Battle of Fredericksburg was one of the bloodiest engagements of the American Civil War, fought between December 11th and December 15th, 1862. In the city of Fredericksburg, Virginia, this battle ended in a crushing defeat for the Union and highlighted the effectiveness of the Confederate defensive strategy. In today's video, we'll analyze this pivotal battle to see the inexperience of Union commanders and understand the key reasons for their painful losses. Pre-battle context. After the Confederate retreat following the Battle of Antietam, General Robert E. Lee led his forces back to Virginia to regroup and prepare for future confrontations. Frustrated by General George B. McClellan's cautious approach during the Antietam campaign, President Abraham Lincoln relieved him of command and appointed General Ambrose Burnside as his replacement. Despite Burnside's lack of experience in commanding large-scale operations, he accepted the difficult task of launching a quick offensive against Lee's army before winter set in. Burnside aimed to strike Confederate forces at Fredericksburg, hoping to break through their defenses and make a rapid advance toward Richmond, the Confederate capital. His initial plan was to quickly cross the Rappahannock River and seize Fredericksburg before Lee could concentrate his forces. Force comparison. Union Federal forces. General Ambrose Burnside commanded the Army of the Potomac with around 120,000 soldiers, including infantry, artillery, and cavalry. Despite having numerical superiority, Burnside lacked tactical experience and struggled with coordinating such a large force across the expansive battlefield. Confederate forces. General Robert E. Lee led the Army of Northern Virginia with approximately 80,000 troops. Although outnumbered, Lee's army was battle-hardened and included some of the most capable commanders of the Confederacy, such as Stonewall Jackson and James Longstreet, who had proven their tactical brilliance in previous battles. Lee had ample time to position his forces on the high ground around Fredericksburg, giving him a major defensive advantage. Battle location and conditions. Fredericksburg was located along the Rappahannock River, which acted as a natural barrier for Union forces attempting to launch their assault. To cross the river, Burnside relied on the construction of pontoon bridges, but delays in the arrival of these bridges led to a significant holdup in the Union advance. This gave Lee the opportunity to fortify his positions on the heights west of the city, particularly at Mary's Heights, a critical vantage point that dominated the battlefield. The Confederate forces took full advantage of these high ground positions, including Mary's Heights and the natural stone walls, to establish a strong defensive line. Their artillery, positioned on the elevated ground, was capable of unleashing devastating barrages on any Union forces attempting to approach. In contrast, the Union forces faced more challenges. The flat, open terrain they had to traverse left them exposed to Confederate artillery and gunfire as they advanced. To make matters worse, as they crossed the river and prepared for their assault on Lee's defenses, they suffered heavy losses from long-range fire and were pinned down in fierce fighting near positions like the base of Mary's Heights. On December 11th, 1862, the Battle of Fredericksburg officially began as Union forces under General Ambrose Burnside began constructing pontoon bridges across the Rappahannock River. This was the initial step in their plan to cross the river and launch a full-scale assault on the Confederate positions in Fredericksburg. However, from the outset, Union troops encountered strong resistance from Confederate sharpshooters and artillery under the command of General Robert E. Lee. Southern forces, occupying positions along the riverbank and from within the city, inflicted heavy casualties on Union engineers and soldiers attempting to build the bridges under fire. The intense fighting led to a prolonged struggle that lasted for hours. In response, Union artillery bombarded the city of Fredericksburg, hoping to weaken the Confederate resistance, but this resulted in significant destruction of civilian areas. By nightfall on December 11th, the Union Army finally completed the construction of the bridges and was ready to cross the river in preparation for the next day's assault. The day marked the beginning of a difficult and bloody struggle for the Union, with challenges already surfacing from the earliest moments of the operation. On December 12th, Union forces under General Burnside began crossing the Rappahannock River into the city of Fredericksburg. Burnside had mobilized around 120,000 soldiers for a major assault on the Confederate positions. However, as Union forces advanced into the city, they met little resistance initially. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had positioned most of his 80,000 troops in defensive positions on the hills west of the city, especially on the commanding heights of Marye's Heights. This created a false sense of security for the Union, leading them to believe that they were facing an easier fight than anticipated. On December 13th, Burnside launched a massive attack against Lee's defensive lines. He divided his forces into several columns, hoping to penetrate the Confederate defenses from different points. However, Marye's Heights proved to be an almost impregnable fortress. Confederate forces, under the command of Generals James Longstreet and Stonewall Jackson, had fortified their positions with dense artillery and infantry ready to repel any Union advance. As Union troops moved across the open field in front of Marye's Heights, they were subjected to withering fire from Confederate forces on the high ground. Throughout December 13th, wave after wave of Union troops attacked Marye's Heights, only to be cut down by Confederate artillery and small arms fire. Despite the mounting casualties, Burnside ordered repeated assaults, but the outcome was the same. The Union forces made little to no progress, and by the end of the day, they had suffered devastating losses. Over 12,600 Union soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, while Confederate casualties numbered around 5,000. Burnside's ambitious assault had failed, and his forces were left in disarray. By December 14th, after the catastrophic losses from the previous day, General Burnside faced the harsh reality that his army's attacks had completely failed against Lee's well-fortified positions. Instead of launching another immediate assault, Burnside hesitated, ordering his troops to maintain their positions along the Rappahannock River and within the city of Fredericksburg. The 14th passed with little action as both sides remained in a standoff. Union forces, having suffered severe losses in the failed assaults, were reluctant to make any further advances. Meanwhile, Confederate forces, though victorious, remained vigilant, anticipating the possibility of renewed attacks from the Union. Lee's army continued to hold their defensive positions on Marye's Heights and the surrounding hills, prepared for any future assault. However, no major engagements occurred that day. The situation became increasingly dire for Burnside's army. Trapped in Fredericksburg under harsh winter conditions and low morale, Burnside, fully aware of the deteriorating conditions of his troops and the impossibility of breaking through Lee's defenses, began considering a withdrawal. On the morning of December 15th, realizing his army could no longer sustain the fight, Burnside ordered a retreat. The pontoon bridges over the Rappahannock River were repaired, and Burnside directed his forces to quietly withdraw back across the river. The retreat was conducted in an orderly and disciplined manner to avoid Confederate pursuit. By the end of December 15th, the entire Union Army had safely crossed back to the eastern bank of the Rappahannock. With this retreat, the Battle of Fredericksburg officially came to a close. The Union Army had suffered a resounding defeat, both strategically and psychologically. General Ambrose Burnside faced harsh criticism for the heavy losses his troops endured in a series of futile attacks against impregnable Confederate defenses. General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia once again emerged victorious, further solidifying their position and successfully holding off the Union's advance. This defeat at Fredericksburg was one of the most devastating for the Union during the Civil War. It highlighted the significant challenges Union commanders faced in coordinating large-scale offensives against entrenched Confederate positions. Meanwhile, the Confederates, despite being outnumbered, continued to demonstrate their defensive prowess under Lee's leadership. The battle's outcome prolonged the war, further intensifying the North's struggle to find a clear path to victory.